Right guys, welcome to Social Influence Lesson 4. This is the first of 4 lessons that are all going to cover obedience. This lesson focuses on Milgram's research as an introduction to obedience, and then the following 3 lessons will each focus on a specific explanation for obedience. The description below will show you what we're going to cover, and if you want to skip to a particular bit of the video, outline, evaluation, 6-mark outline, you can do so using the timestamps. And then before we get started, if you find this video useful, please, as always, let me know by giving it a like. So, just to get us started, here is a definition of obedience. It's a form of social influence in which an individual follows a direct order where the person issuing the order is a figure of authority who has the power to punish when obedient behavior is not forthcoming. Now, a lot of research into obedience was born in an attempt to try and make sense of some of the most horrific parts of our past, and Milgram's research is no exception to that. He wanted to find an answer as to why such a high proportion of the German population obeyed Hitler's commands during the Second World War. Now, one possibility that Milgram was entertaining was that the German people were in some way different to people in other countries, perhaps more obedient. However, in order to work out whether he was right or not, he had to design a baseline procedure that could be used to assess obedience levels in people. And that's exactly what he did with his study. So let's start off by having a look at his procedure. Milgram's participants were made up of 40 men, all of which volunteered to take part in a study on memory. More specifically, on the impact of punishment on learning. The study was set to take place at Yale University, and when they arrived there, the participants met the experimenter and another participant, both of which were actually confederates of the researcher. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, confederates are people who are in on the study. They're part of the research team, and basically they're undercover. The 2 participants drew lots to see who would be assigned to which role within the study. However, unbeknownst to them, the draw was rigged, with the participant always gaining the role of the teacher and the confederates always gaining the role of the learner. The study required the participant to test the learner's ability to recall pairs of words. Each time the learner got an answer wrong, which they always did because that was part of the study, the teacher had to administer an electric shock. Every incorrect answer would result in a higher voltage shock, starting at 15 volts and going all the way up in intervals of 15 to a maximum of 450 volts. Bearing in mind that the standard voltage on a UK socket is 230 volts. And then, just to add a layer of realism, the learner was strapped by the arms into a chair in the room next door, and a shock was demonstrated to the teacher to make them appear more realistic. At 300 volts, the learner would bang on the wall and complain. He'd ask to be let out, he'd say he didn't want to do it anymore, he'd say he had a heart condition, you name it, he'd say it to try and complain and to try and get the teacher to stop. After 315 volts, the learner would just go quiet and wouldn't say anything anymore. The experiment was set to continue until either the teacher refused to continue or the maximum level of 450 volts was reached. But there was another twist in the study, because if the teacher tried to stop the experiment, the researcher would respond with a series of verbal prods that were designed to coerce the participant to continue. So he'd say things like, "The experiment requires you to continue," or "Please continue," or "You have no choice but to continue." Of course, this was another way to see whether the participants would obey or not. Now, the findings of Milgram's study are in equal parts amazing and shocking. Excuse the pun, please. 100% of participants progressed all the way to delivering 300 volts. 12.5% stopped at 300 volts. That's 5 participants. But 65% continued to the highest level and administered 450 volts. Alongside those findings, Milgram also collected a series of qualitative data and observed signs of extreme tension in his participants, for example, sweating, nail biting, trembling, and 3 of the participants even had full-blown seizures during the study. And from that, Milgram concluded that German people are not different, because the American participants in his study were equally willing to obey orders, even if it meant causing harm. So that means that ordinary people are extremely obedient to authority, even when asked to behave in an inhumane manner. And it's not evil people who commit atrocities, but ordinary people obeying authority. Right, I hope that has all made sense. We're going to move on to some evaluation points now. I've got 4 evaluation points for you. Obviously, take the ones that you want to use if you don't want to use all of them. Okay? So, one strength is that Milgram's findings were replicated in a French documentary that was made about reality TV. Okay, so Milgram's findings have got research support. This particular documentary focused on a game show that was made especially for the program. The participants in the game show thought that they were contestants in a pilot episode for a new show called The Game of Death. They were paid to give fake electric shocks ordered by the presenter to other participants who were actually Confederates, and that was all done in front of a studio audience. They found that 80% of the participants delivered the maximum shock of 460 volts to an apparently unconscious man. Their behavior was almost identical to that of Milgram's participants in that they showed things like nervous laughter, nail biting, and other signs of anxiety, alongside being completely obedient and delivering potentially fatal electric shocks to an innocent person. Okay, now this supports Milgram's original findings about obedience to authority, and it demonstrates that the findings were not due to special circumstances, but actually they can be replicated, and therefore that lends credibility to Milgram's original findings. However, a limitation of Milgram's research is that it has low internal validity. That means that it may not actually have been testing what Milgram intended to test. So, Milgram reported that 75% of his participants said that they believed the shock was genuine. He did a debrief with them after the study, and that was what came out of it. However, Orne and Holland in 1968 argued that the participants behaved in the way that they did because they didn't believe the setup was real. So actually, they were just play acting. Research by Perry in 2013 confirms that, because Perry and her colleagues listened to tapes of Milgram's participants and reported that only about half of them believed the shocks were real. 2/3 of the participants who didn't believe they were real were in fact disobedient. And that suggests that participants may have been responding to demand characteristics, trying to fulfill the aims of the study, and not actually acting naturally. However, a counterpoint to that was put forward by Sheridan and King in 1972, who conducted a study using a procedure like Milgram's, where participants had to give real shocks to a puppy in response to orders from an experimenter. Just to be clear, these were real shocks. Okay? Now, despite seeing the real distress of the animal, 54% of the men and 100% of the women gave what they thought was a fatal electric shock to a live puppy. And that suggests that the effects in Milgram's study were genuine because people behaved obediently in Sheridan and King's study even when they knew the shocks were real. And then one final criticism of Milgram's study is that it broke several ethical guidelines. Milgram deceived his participants as they believed that they were taking part in a study on how punishment affects learning rather than on obedience. They were also deceived by the rigging of the role allocation in that it was predetermined. Furthermore, due to the nature of the task, Milgram didn't protect his participants from psychological harm, since many of them showed signs of real distress during the experiment, and they may have even continued to feel guilty following the experiment, knowing that they could have harmed another human being. Some critics of Milgram's believe that these breaches could serve to damage the reputation of psychology and jeopardize future research, because the more we deceive people, the less people are actually going to want to take part in psychological research, and the less credible psychology and psychological research is going to be. However, at this point, we could consider whether the rewards of the research actually outweigh the costs. Because, arguably, yes, the importance of the findings could justify the way that the research was conducted, because the research is actually fairly useful for society in determining the factors that affect obedience to authority. So as a result of the research, we have a better understanding of why people obey orders that they might not agree with. And it gives us a little bit of an explanation as to how atrocities come about in the real world. So that could just be another little point that you add on here at the end, just a little counterpoint to the ethical issues, because there's no doubt Milgram did breach ethical guidelines. But the question that you always have to ask yourself with ethics is, does the benefit outweigh the cost? If you can make an argument for the fact that the benefits do outweigh the cost, then chuck it in to the evaluation point, because an examiner will like to see that you can actually argue both sides of that particular point, and will like to see that you can actually pull together all of your psychological knowledge to create a coherent argument. Okay? Right then, just to finish off, here's an example 6-mark outline. Now, I'm not going to read it to you. Feel free to pause the video and give it a quick read if you want. Obviously, this isn't the only way to go. It's just an example, but I have highlighted for you the important elements in bold so you can see what I'm marking out as the key bits of information. Okay, as always, it is around 150 to 175 words, because that's kind of what you should be aiming for in a 6-mark outline, and it has a nice breadth-depth trade-off so that you're giving the examiner enough detail and also enough elements of the study to show that you know what you're talking about. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the video. I hope it's been useful and I hope it's all made sense. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comment section below and I will do my best to get back to you ASAP. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.